chosen ones. They're finally seeing it now. The fog is clearing from their eyes, and suddenly everything you did makes perfect sense to them. Welcome back, you architects of impossible outcomes, you silent strategists who played three-dimensional chess while they were still learning checkers. Something shifted in the last few weeks. People who questioned your sanity are now asking for your advice. Friends who called you reckless are suddenly calling you brave. Family members who staged interventions are now studying your life like it's a masterclass. The same people who diagnosed you with every disorder in the book are now wondering how you had the vision to see what nobody else could see. And here's what's happening right now in their minds. They're retracing every step you took that looked insane to them. They're rewinding the tape of your life and watching it with new eyes. They're finally understanding that what they called your breakdown was actually your breakthrough. The truth is landing on them in waves, and each wave brings a new realization. You weren't losing your mind when you walked away from that relationship everyone loved. You were saving it. You weren't being dramatic when you quit that prestigious job without a backup plan. You were being precise. You weren't isolating when you disappeared for months without explanation. You were excavating yourself from beneath years of performance and pretense. They called it chaos because they couldn't see the pattern. They called it madness because they couldn't hear the frequency you were operating on. Let me take you back to that specific moment. You know the one. That decision that made everyone in your life collectively panic. Maybe it was ending something that looked perfect on paper, but felt like poison in your bones. Maybe it was starting something that had no guarantee, no safety net, no logical explanation for why you believed it would work. Maybe it was the moment you stopped defending yourself, stopped explaining, stopped trying to translate your vision into language they could understand. Whatever it was, that moment became the dividing line between who you used to be and who you were becoming. They gathered around that moment like it was a crime scene. They analyzed it from every angle, trying to find the malfunction in your thinking. Your friends had emergency meetings about you. Your family whispered concerns in kitchen corners. Even people who barely knew you felt entitled to opinions about your mental state. The consensus was clear. You were spiraling. You were lost. You were making a massive mistake that would take years to recover from. Some of them tried to intervene directly with that condescending concern dripping from their voices. Others just watched from a distance, waiting for the inevitable crash they were so certain was coming. But here's what they couldn't see from their vantage point. Here's what they couldn't possibly comprehend, because they've never operated at your frequency. Every move you made was calculated down to the millimeter. Every bridge you burned, you checked the wind direction first. Every person you cut off, you had already run the simulation of your future with them still in it, and you deleted that timeline with surgical precision. You weren't acting on impulse, you were acting on information they couldn't perceive. You were responding to data that their instruments couldn't measure. They thought you were falling apart. You were falling into alignment. They thought you were losing yourself. You were finding yourself underneath all the versions of you that were designed to make them comfortable. They thought you were destroying your life. You were demolishing the structure that was built to house someone else's dreams for you. The difference between breakdown and breakthrough is just perspective and timing. From the outside, they look identical. Both involve everything falling apart. Both require you to let go of what you knew. Both demand a kind of death before the resurrection. Your frequency of intelligence terrifies people because it doesn't announce itself with credentials or pedigree. It doesn't seek permission from committees or wait for approval from authorities. It just moves, and when it moves, it looks absolutely insane to people who are still trying to predict outcomes using formulas that were designed to keep them safe, small, and manageable. You stopped playing by rules that were written to limit you, and they called it rebellion. You started playing a game they didn't even know existed, and they called it delusion. But madness and genius have always shared the same address. The only difference is the scoreboard at the end. The only difference is whether you were right, and you were right. You are right, not because you got lucky, not because you stumbled into success, but because you saw something they couldn't see, and you had the courage to act on that vision when you had every logical reason not to. Let's talk about what calculated risk actually looks like. From the outside, from the perspective of people who have built their entire existence around safety and certainty, calculated risk looks identical to recklessness. The person who jumps without a visible parachute and the person who jumps knowing exactly where they'll land look exactly the same mid-air. Both are falling, both have left solid ground, both have committed to something that can't be undone. The difference is invisible until the landing. You were the person who studied the physics while everyone else was asleep. You were the person who ran the numbers in the dark while they were dreaming small dreams in comfortable cages. You were the person who calculated with variables they didn't believe existed. Your math looked like madness because they couldn't see the equations you were working with. You were solving for outcomes they couldn't imagine because they had never allowed themselves to want something that far outside the script they were given. And here's the beautiful, devastating truth about what's happening right now. They're catching up to a decision you made months ago, maybe years ago. They're finally arriving at the conclusion you reached when there was nothing but darkness and your own conviction to light the way. They're finally seeing the vision you had when everyone was telling you it was impossible. That time gap between when you knew and when they figured it out, that's not just lag, that's proof. That's proof you were operating on a different level. That's proof their concern was never about protecting you. It was always about protecting themselves from the implications of your courage. Because when you made that move, when you did that thing that looked insane, something in them recognized it. Something deep in their unconscious knew you were onto something real, something true, something they didn't have the strength to reach for themselves. And that recognition, that brief flash of what if they're right, it terrified them more than your potential failure ever could. Because if you were right, if your crazy was actually clarity, then what did that make them? It made them complicit in their own stagnation. It made every safe choice they'd made look like exactly what it was, surrender to fear dressed up as responsibility. So they had to make you wrong. They had to construct a narrative where you were the cautionary tale. They had to turn your boldness into a warning label so they could sleep at night in their prisons of comfort. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. You didn't crash and burn. You didn't come crawling back with apologies and admissions that they were right all along. Instead, you did something far more devastating to their worldview. You thrived, you evolved, you became living, breathing proof that the path they were too scared to take actually leads somewhere beautiful. Now they have to live with that reality. Now they have to watch you exist in a dimension they told themselves was impossible. Now they have to reconcile the fact that you trusted yourself when every voice around you was screaming doubt, and you were correct. Being correct before everyone else catches up is what they call genius, even when they're too proud to use that word to your face. And here's the part that really changes the game. You're not even angry anymore. You're not holding grudges or waiting for apologies that will never come in the form you once needed. Somewhere along your journey through the fire, you realize something that shifted everything. Their doubt was never about you. It was always about them. Their fear was always their own. Their need to call you crazy was always their need to feel sane in their own stagnation. Their intervention was always about stopping the mirror you held up to their own unlived lives. So now when they come back, when they slide into your messages with casual openers designed to test the waters, you see it clearly. When they say things like, "I've been thinking about you," or "You look really happy," or "Can we talk about what happened?" you understand what's actually happening. This isn't reconciliation. This is reconnaissance. They're not checking on you. They're checking if the rules they've been living by are actually real, or if you found a way to break them without consequences. They're studying you now the way they should have trusted you then. Some of them, the really bold ones, they'll try to rewrite history entirely. They'll claim they always believed in you. They'll say they knew you'd figure it out. They'll position themselves as quiet supporters who were there all along, just less vocal than the doubters. But you remember, You remember who was silent when silence felt like abandonment. You remember who questioned when you needed certainty. You remember who stayed and who scattered when your life looked like a disaster movie to everyone watching. But here's the beautiful part that makes all of it worthwhile. You don't need them to rewrite history because you're too busy writing the future. You don't need them to admit they were wrong because you're too focused on being right about what comes next. You don't need their validation now because you learned to validate yourself when their approval was the only currency you thought mattered. That lesson alone, that brutal education in self-trust, it was worth every second of their doubt. Let's talk about the pattern they're starting to recognize, because this isn't the first time you've done this. This isn't the first time you've made a move that looked questionable and turned it into something undeniable. You have a history of this. A track record of seeing around corners that haven't been built yet, a reputation, whether they acknowledge it openly or not, for being right in ways that take time to prove. You're the person who called the ending before anyone else saw the cracks forming. You're the person who left the situation early before it turned into the mess everyone else regrets surviving. You're the person who walked away from opportunities that looked golden but smelled wrong, and then watched those opportunities rust in real time. You have instincts that operate faster than their logic can process. That's always been your advantage and their confusion. They process through committees and consensus. You process through clarity. They need everyone to agree before they move. You need truth. They move when it's safe. You move when it's right. That fundamental difference in operating systems creates a lag between you and them. They're always seeing your moves in retrospect, analyzing your decisions after the outcomes are already visible, wondering how you knew when there was no way to know. But you did know. You always know. Not because you're psychic or supernaturally gifted, but because you've learned to listen to the frequency they've tuned out. You hear the whispers underneath the words. You see the patterns underneath the chaos. You feel the shifts before the ground starts moving. They call it intuition, like it's magic or mystery. You know it's just paying attention at a level most people find exhausting. You know it's processing information they've been trained to ignore. That's why your calculated risks looked like madness to them. You were calculating with data they couldn't perceive. You were running equations that included variables they didn't believe existed. You were solving for outcomes they couldn't imagine because they'd never allowed themselves to want something that far outside the prescribed path. Your math looked insane because they couldn't see the numbers you were working with. Now they're starting to ask questions. Now that they see you were right, now that they realize your breakdown was actually a breakthrough, they want something from you. They want the formula. They want the shortcut. They want you to translate your instinct into instructions they can follow without having to develop that instinct themselves. They want your results without your risk. They want your clarity without your chaos. They want the destination without the journey through darkness that got you there. And here's where you have to be careful. Here's where the real test begins, because it's tempting to teach everyone. It's tempting to take every person who doubted you and turn them into a student just to prove you were always the teacher. But not everyone deserves your wisdom. Not everyone has earned access to your process. Some lessons are only meant for people who learn them in the fire, not people who show up after the smoke clears, asking how you survived the flames. Your story is yours. Your strategy is yours. Your madness, your genius, your calculated chaos, it all belongs to you. You don't owe them the map. You don't owe them the breakdown of every decision that led you here. You don't owe them the privilege of understanding what they refuse to trust. Some people want to download your consciousness without doing the work of developing their own. Some people want to copy your moves without understanding the game you're playing. But for the ones who were there, for the ones who stayed quiet when they didn't understand but didn't question your sanity, for the ones who gave you space when you needed distance and didn't make it about them, those people get to see behind the curtain. Those people earned the right to know how you did it, not because they supported you perfectly, but because they supported you imperfectly without trying to stop you. They trusted you even when they didn't understand you. That kind of faith is rare and precious. Here's what you can tell them. Here's what you can share with the people who actually deserve to know. You didn't have a plan. You had a compass. You didn't follow steps. You followed truth. You didn't calculate every outcome. You calculated the cost of staying the same and decided any risk was better than that certain death. You didn't know it would work. You knew doing nothing definitely wouldn't. You trusted yourself in the dark. You believed your instincts over their advice. You chose your peace over their understanding. You valued your future over their comfort. Every time you made a choice that looked insane, you were really making a choice between two versions of yourself, the one they wanted you to be and the one you needed to become. You chose yourself every single time, even when it looked selfish, even when it felt lonely, even when you had no proof it would lead anywhere good. That choice, that consistent choosing of yourself, that's the genius they're recognizing now. That's the calculation they're finally seeing. You bet on yourself when you were the longest shot in the room. You invested in your own vision when no one else could see it. You held the line when everyone else was telling you to retreat. They want to know how you had that kind of faith. They want to know where that certainty came from. They want to know what made you so sure when everything looked so uncertain. The answer is going to disappoint them because it's too simple. The answer is you weren't sure, you were committed. There's a profound difference. Certainty is knowing the outcome before you begin. Commitment is moving forward without it. You didn't know it would work. You decided it had to. You didn't know you'd survive. You decided survival was non-negotiable. You didn't know you'd win. You decided losing wasn't an option you'd entertain. That decision, that refusal to accept the version of your life where you stayed small, where you played safe, where you died slowly in comfort, that was the real calculation. That was the equation they couldn't see. You weren't calculating odds of success. You were calculating the cost of staying the same. And when you put those numbers side by side, when you saw what it would cost you to remain in that comfortable cage, suddenly every risk looked reasonable. Suddenly jumping without a visible parachute looked sane compared to standing still on ground that was slowly poisoning you. Let's go deeper into the specific moments they called crazy that you knew were necessary. Remember when you stopped explaining yourself, when you just started moving without the mandatory press conference about your intentions. They called it secretive, they called it suspicious, some of them called it arrogant, but you knew something they didn't understand. You knew that explanation dilutes execution. Every time you justified your moves to people who couldn't see your vision, you were giving them ammunition to talk you out of it. Their questions weren't coming from curiosity, they were coming from fear, and fear is contagious, so you stopped speaking their language. You stopped translating your future into terms they could understand. You let your actions do the talking, and you let time do the teaching. That silence they called secretive was actually protection. You were protecting your decision from the doubt they would inevitably plant. When you walked away from people without closure, without the dramatic final conversation, without the tidy ending they thought they deserved, they called it cold. They called it cruel. They said you ghosted like you were the villain in their story, but you knew something about closure they didn't. You knew that some doors don't need to be ceremonially shut. Some doors just need to be left behind while you keep walking. The closure conversation they wanted was really just another attempt to change your mind. Another opportunity to plant doubt. Another chance to make you second-guess the knowing that lived in your bones. So you denied them that opportunity. You protected your decision by refusing to defend it. You honored your choice by not putting it up for debate. That was genius masquerading as coldness. That was strategy disguised as cruelty. When you disappeared from social media, when you stopped performing your life for an audience that was watching you like a reality show, they said you were isolating. They said you were cutting yourself off. They diagnosed you with everything from depression to delusion because you stopped giving them content to consume, but you were doing something they couldn't comprehend. You were remembering who you were before you became a character in everyone else's story. You were shedding the performance. You were killing the avatar. You were finding the version of yourself that existed before you learned to shapeshift for survival. That process, that brutal and beautiful process of unbecoming everything you're not, it requires silence, it requires absence. It requires you to be so unavailable to their narratives that you can finally hear your own voice underneath all the noise. They called it crazy because your absence made them uncomfortable. It made them question why they needed your presence to validate their own existence. It made them wonder what you were doing in that silence that was so much more important than maintaining your position in their social ecosystem. The answer they couldn't know because you weren't performing it. You were healing, you were building, you were becoming. Now let's address the moment that really confused them. The moment you stopped fighting. Remember when you used to argue back, when you used to defend your perspective, correct their misunderstandings, prove your point until they had no choice but to see your side. Then one day you just stopped. You let them think whatever they wanted. You let their version of events stand uncorrected. You let them be wrong about you in public while you focused on being right about yourself in private. They thought you'd given up. They thought you'd accepted their narrative. Some of them thought they'd finally broken you into submission, but you hadn't surrendered. You'd transcended. You'd realized that their opinion of you was none of your business. You realized that defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you was pointless, like trying to teach physics to a wall, possible in theory, pointless in practice. So you withdrew your energy from that battlefield. You stopped fighting for your reputation in the court of people who'd already made their judgment. You let them have their wrong story because you were too busy living the right one. That selective silence, that strategic surrender of the argument to win the war, that was the calculation they mistook for defeat. Here's what they're realizing now, slowly and reluctantly. Every move you made that looked like a mistake was actually a test. You were testing their loyalty, their trust, their ability to believe in you, when belief was the only currency that mattered, and they failed. They chose the comfort of group consensus over the courage of individual faith. They chose the safety of doubting you over the risk of defending you. They chose their own peace of mind over your journey through necessary chaos. That failure, their failure, it taught you something invaluable. It showed you who deserves access to your future. It revealed who has the capacity to hold space for your becoming without trying to control it. It clarified who can be trusted with your truth and who needs a carefully edited version to feel comfortable. Those distinctions matter now more than ever, because here's what happens next. Now that they see you were right, now that your life is undeniable proof that your madness was method, they're going to want back in. They're going to want to pretend they were there all along. They're going to want to reap the benefits of the harvest without having tended the soil during the hard seasons, and you get to decide who gets that access and who doesn't. This is your moment of power. This is where you get to choose who comes with you into the next chapter and who stays behind with the wrong story they told about you. This is where you get to honor the people who held faith even when they didn't understand, and close the door on the people who chose judgment over trust. This is where you get to be selective in ways you've never allowed yourself to be before. You don't owe anyone a spot in your future just because they knew you in your past. You don't owe anyone forgiveness just because your success makes their doubt look bad. You don't owe anyone the story of how you survived the thing they were certain would destroy you. Your journey is yours. Your testimony is yours. Your wisdom is yours. And you get to decide who earns the right to receive it. What they're realizing now, what's finally landing in their consciousness, is that you weren't lucky. You weren't reckless. You weren't crazy. You were correct. And being correct before everyone else figures it out, that's what genius actually looks like. It doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it just quietly does what everyone else is too scared to do, and then waits for the world to catch up. You are that person. You've always been that person, the one who sees what others can't see, the one who trusts what others won't trust, the one who moves when others freeze, the one who bets everything on themselves when everyone else is advising caution. That's not madness, that's mastery. That's what it looks like when someone refuses to abandon themselves, no matter how loud the voices of doubt become. They're seeing it now. They're understanding it now. They're recognizing that what they called your breakdown was actually the moment you broke through to the other side of fear. They're realizing that what they called your isolation was actually the cocoon where your transformation happened. They're understanding that what they called your coldness was actually the boundary that protected your becoming. And the most beautiful part of all of this, you don't need their recognition to validate what you already know. Their awakening to your truth doesn't change the fact that you lived it in the dark. Their understanding now doesn't erase the fact that you trusted yourself when you had every reason not to. Their praise today doesn't replace the faith you had to have yesterday when their doubt was the only response you received. You did this. You chose yourself. You trusted the knowing in your bones over the logic in their arguments. You bet everything on a vision only you could see. You walked through fire while they watched from a safe distance and told you to turn back. You survived. You thrived. You became exactly who you needed to become. So let them realize it now. Let them finally see what you've known all along. Let them catch up to the decision you made when there was nothing but darkness and your own conviction to light the way. Let them understand that your calculated chaos was more strategic than their careful plans. Let them recognize that your madness was genius wearing a disguise, because you, chosen one, you were right. You are right. And everyone who doubted you is finally waking up to that truth. Welcome to the other side of their understanding. Welcome to the moment where your vindication arrives not as revenge, but as simple, undeniable reality. Welcome to the life you built while they were busy questioning whether you'd survive. They just realized you weren't falling apart, you were falling into place. And now that they can finally see it, now that the picture is clear, there's nothing left to do but keep moving forward into the future you always knew was waiting for you. But let's talk about what this recognition actually costs them. Because understanding that you were right means accepting that they were wrong. Not just wrong about you, but wrong about the entire framework they used to judge you. Wrong about what's possible, wrong about what's necessary, wrong about the price of transformation. That's a bitter pill, and most of them will never fully swallow it. They'll get halfway there and then stop, stuck in a liminal space where they admire your results but refuse to acknowledge the methodology that got you there. Watch how they pass it. Watch how they separate your success from your strategy. They'll celebrate where you ended up while still maintaining that how you got there was questionable. They'll praise your courage in retrospect while still believing they would have found a safer way. They'll claim they always knew you'd figure it out while conveniently forgetting every conversation where they tried to talk you down from the ledge. This selective memory, this rewriting of their own role in your story, it's not malicious, it's protective. They're protecting themselves from the implications of your success. Because if they fully acknowledged that your way worked, that your instincts were accurate, that your timing was perfect, they'd have to confront every moment they chose, safety over truth in their own lives. They'd have to face every dream they abandoned because the path looked too uncertain. They'd have to reckon with every version of themselves they killed to stay comfortable. Your existence becomes a mirror, and most people will do anything to avoid looking directly at what that mirror shows them, so they'll take pieces of your story and leave the rest. They'll admire your strength but call your methods extreme. They'll respect your outcome but maintain they would have handled it differently. They'll want your freedom but not your willingness to burn everything down to get it. This cherry-picking of your journey is another test. It shows you who's actually learning and who's just spectating. It reveals who has the capacity for real transformation and who just wants to feel inspired without changing anything. The ones who truly get it, the ones who are actually learning from what you did, they're not asking for your secrets. They're watching how you move now. They're studying how you make decisions in real time. They're noticing what you say no to just as much as what you say yes to. They're learning the pattern, not the specific moves, because they understand that your path is yours alone, but the principles that guided you through the darkness, those are transferable. These people, they're rare. They're the ones who saw something in your madness, even when they didn't understand it. They're the ones who didn't try to stop you, even when they were scared for you. They're the ones who held space for your becoming, without needing to control its shape. And now they're the ones who get to benefit from the wisdom you earned, not because they deserve it through loyalty alone, but because they have the capacity to receive it and use it. You'll know them by how they approach you. They don't ask, "How did you do it?" like it's a recipe they can follow. They ask, "What did you see that I'm still missing?" They don't want your map. They want to develop their own vision. They don't want to copy your moves. They want to understand the game you're playing so they can play their own version of it. This is the difference between students and spectators. Students are willing to do the work. Spectators just want the highlights. And here's what you need to understand about this moment, about this season where everyone's catching up to what you already knew. This isn't your validation. This is your crossroads, because now you have to decide who you're becoming next. The person who was willing to be misunderstood to get here, that person was powerful. But the person who has the discipline to stay true, even when understanding arrives, even when approval shows up, that person is unstoppable. There's a danger in this recognition. There's a trap in their sudden belief in you. The trap is this: you might start performing for their approval again. You might start making decisions based on maintaining their newfound respect. You might start editing your next moves to ensure they don't question you again. And the moment you do that, the moment you let their opinion back into your decision-making process, you've lost the very thing that made you successful in the first place. Your power came from operating independently of their understanding. Your strength came from trusting yourself when trust was all you had. Your genius came from listening to frequencies they couldn't hear. The second you start broadcasting on their wavelength to maintain their approval, you've tuned out the very signal that guided you through the darkness. This is the test that comes after the vindication. Can you stay true to yourself even when being true is no longer controversial? Most people fail this test. Most people get to this point and then plateau. They achieve enough success to quiet the critics and then they stop evolving. They reach a level of validation that feels comfortable and they build a camp there. They trade the discomfort of growth for the pleasure of being understood, and slowly, quietly, they become a monument to who they used to be instead of a living example of who they're becoming. You're different. You've always been different. The same instinct that told you to burn it all down when everyone said to hold on, that instinct is still speaking. The same voice that told you to walk away when everyone said to stay and fight, that voice hasn't gone silent. The same knowing that made you look crazy during the darkest nights, that knowing is still there, still whispering about what comes next. And what comes next might look just as insane to them as what came before, because you're not done transforming. You're not done becoming. You're not done shedding skins and burning bridges and making moves that terrify people who thought they finally understood you. This recognition they're giving you now, this validation they're offering, it's beautiful. Receive it, acknowledge it, but don't you dare let it stop you. There are levels to this that they can't even imagine yet. There are versions of you waiting to emerge that will make this current iteration look tame. There are moves you're going to make in the future that will have them questioning your sanity all over again. And that's exactly how it should be, because you're not here to be understood. You're here to be unstoppable. Let me tell you what they see when they look at you now. They see someone who bet everything and won. They see someone who trusted themselves in impossible circumstances and came out the other side transformed. They see evidence that the rules they've been following aren't the only rules that exist. They see proof that there's another way, and depending on who they are, that proof either inspires them or terrifies them. The ones it inspires, they're about to embark on their own journeys. They're about to make their own crazy moves. They're about to burn their own bridges and trust their own instincts and terrify their own circles of concern. And when they do, they're going to need what you needed when you were in the thick of it. They're going to need someone who believes in them even when it looks insane. They're going to need someone who doesn't try to talk them down from the ledge. They're going to need someone who's been there and made it through. That's your role now if you choose to accept it. Not teacher, not guru, not expert, just someone who went first, someone who proved it's possible, someone who can hold space for another person's necessary chaos without trying to control it. You don't have to give them the formula. You just have to give them permission to trust themselves the way you trusted yourself. You don't have to show them the path. You just have to remind them they have the capacity to forge their own. But the ones it terrifies, the ones who see your success and feel threatened by it, they're going to become different. They're going to shift from doubters to detractors. They're going to move from concern to competition. They're going to start telling stories about your success that minimize your sacrifice or attribute it to luck or privilege or timing. They need to believe your success is unrepeatable. They need to believe you had some advantage they didn't have. Because if they can't explain away your success, they have to confront their own stagnation. These people will become background noise in your life. They'll talk about you but not to you. They'll have opinions about your choices but never the courage to question you directly. They'll exist in the margins of your world, watching from a distance, commenting from the sidelines, creating narratives that protect their own egos from the implications of your evolution. Let them. Their stories about you have nothing to do with you. Their need to diminish your journey is about their own journey. They're not taking. Now let me put you onto something real. Destiny Engine. I built this because I was done watching chosen ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation and attacks while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app. It's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. It generates personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. You're going to encounter another phenomenon too. The people who want to claim you now. The ones who see your success and want to retroactively establish deeper connections than actually existed. They're going to start telling stories about how close you were, how much they supported you, how they always knew. They're going to exaggerate their role in your journey. They're going to position themselves as integral to your success. This is human nature. People want to be associated with winning. Handle this with grace but not gullibility. You can be kind to people who are rewriting history without accepting their revised version as truth. You can acknowledge their presence in your past without granting them access to your future. You can appreciate whatever small role they played without pretending it was bigger than it was. This is another skill you're developing now, the ability to receive people's narratives about you without being bound by them. Because here's the thing about being vindicated after being doubted. Everyone wants to tell you who you are now. They want to define your success. They want to explain your journey. They want to create a story about you that makes sense to them. And all of these stories, even the positive ones, are limitations. They're boxes. They're definitions. And the moment you accept their definition, even a flattering one, you've constrained yourself again. You didn't break free from one set of expectations just to conform to another. You didn't refuse their limitations when they were critical just to accept their limitations when they're complementary. You didn't fight for the right to define yourself just to hand that right back when they started saying nice things. Stay free, stay undefined, stay in motion, stay becoming. There's a frequency you operate on that most people will never reach. Not because they're incapable, but because they're unwilling to pay the price of admission. That frequency requires you to be comfortable with being misunderstood. It requires you to trust yourself more than you trust consensus. It requires you to value truth over comfort, growth over stability, becoming over belonging. Most people aren't willing to pay that price. Most people will sacrifice their own evolution to maintain their connections. But you paid it. You're still paying it. Every day you choose yourself. Every time you trust your instincts over their advice. Every moment you pick truth over comfort. You're paying the price of operating at this frequency. And the recognition they're giving you now, that's not payment for what you've done. That's just them finally tuning into a station you've been broadcasting on all along. Don't change your frequency to keep them tuned in. Don't adjust your signal to maintain their understanding. Don't dilute your truth to make it more palatable. Keep broadcasting at the level that's authentic to you. The people who are meant to receive it will find the station. The people who can't handle the frequency will tune out, and both outcomes are exactly as they should be. You're entering a new phase now, the phase where you're vindicated but not validated by that vindication. The phase where you're proven right but not dependent on that proof. The phase where you're understood but not defined by that understanding. This is mastery. This is what it looks like when someone breaks free, not just from criticism, but from the need for approval entirely. They just realized you were right. Good. Let that land. Let them catch up. Let them see what you saw months or years ahead of time. Let them understand what you understood when understanding was the only comfort you had. But don't let their realization become your destination. Don't let their recognition become your finish line, because you're not done. You're nowhere near done. You're just getting started on the next impossible thing they can't see yet. And when you make that next move, when you trust yourself into the next dark unknown, when you bet everything again on a vision only you can see, they're going to question you all over again. They're going to forget that you were right this time. They're going to doubt that lightning can strike twice. They're going to worry and warn and whisper, just like they did before. And you're going to prove them wrong all over again. Because that's what you do, that's who you are. That's the frequency you operate on. Welcome to the other side of their understanding, chosen one. But don't get too comfortable here. The other side of their next misunderstanding is calling your name. And you've never been one to ignore that.